The morning sun hadn't even cleared the rooftops when Jack Reynolds' alarm buzzed to life, vibrating against the cracked nightstand with a shrill urgency. He groaned, slapped at it until the noise stopped, and sat up in the dim gray light. Another day, another scramble. The smell of motor oil clung to his clothes even after last night's quick shower, and the ache in his back from a full week under hoods and engines reminded him that rest was more suggestion than reality. He shuffled into the kitchen where yesterday's dishes still sat in the drying rack, and the coffee pot blinked stubbornly, demanding to be filled. A box of cereal sat half open on the counter, its contents dangerously low. He poured the last of it into a chipped bowl and added milk with a cautious sniff still good. Barely. Across the hall. Lily's bedroom door creaked open, and a mop of tangled hair peeked out. Dad, her sleepy voice called. "Morning, Bug," he said, softening. Lily patted in, dragging her backpack by one strap. "Is it Saturday?" "Almost. One more day of school." He slid the bowl across the table. "Eat quick. We're already running behind." As she sat and crunched through her cereal, Jack worked around her, making a peanut butter sandwich, stuffing a juice box and an apple into her lunch bag, then checking the time and muttering a curse under his breath. He still had to get her to school, get back to the shop, and meet a supplier who was already 2 weeks late on delivering brake pads. "Did you sign my permission slip?" Lily asked through a mouthful of cereal. Jack froze mid-step. "What slip?" She pointed to her folder, which he'd completely forgotten about. "Picnic day. Miss Reading says we have to bring it or we can't go." With a sigh, he grabbed a pen, scribbled his name, and stuffed the paper back in. "There, done. You're official." 10 minutes later, they were out the door. The old sedan coughed and whined before starting, but it held as they drove down the cracked street toward the elementary school. Jack glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. He was tired, overwhelmed, barely keeping it all together. But as Lily smiled at him, jelly on her cheek, he knew he wouldn't trade it for anything. The evening light filtered through the blinds in soft golden stripes, casting long shadows across the small living room. Jack sat on the worn couch, sorting through a stack of unopened bills with the same dull ache settling in his chest as always. Lily was on the carpet in front of the coffee table, carefully coloring a picture of a tree with birds in the branches, her tongue poking out in quiet concentration. "Dad," she said suddenly, not looking up from her drawing. "Yeah, Bug." She paused, then glanced back at him with wide, hopeful eyes. "Can we have a picnic?" Jack blinked. "A picnic. Like a real one," she said, sitting up straighter. "With a blanket and sandwiches and maybe juice boxes? In the park? Like the families in the movies. Not the backyard, a real one." He set the envelopes down slowly. "Where'd you get that idea?" "Zoe had one last weekend. Her mom packed strawberries and everything," Lily said dreamily. "She said it was the best day ever." Jack managed to smile. Even as his chest tightened, it sounded so simple, so normal. But everything these days had a price tag: time, gas, groceries. He wanted to say yes without thinking, but his brain was already calculating how much a loaf of bread and a pack of juice boxes would eat into next week's grocery budget. "I don't know," he said gently, trying not to let the weariness in his voice show. "I've got a lot going on with work." Lily didn't pout or complain. She just nodded, looked down at her drawing, and started coloring again. But her smile had faded. Jack sat there for a long moment, watching her shoulders slope, watching the way her crayon slowed. He rubbed his hands over his face and sighed. "Hey, Bug." She looked up again. He smiled, soft and crooked. "How about Saturday we'll pack some sandwiches, find a sunny spot in the park, and have our own best day ever?" Lily's face lit up like a sunrise. She jumped up and threw her arms around his neck. "Really, really," he whispered into her hair, holding her tight. "Just don't forget the strawberries." Friday started like most days did, early and already behind. The hum of the space heater barely kept the morning chill at bay in Jack's small kitchen as he stood over a battered notebook. Pen in hand, trying to stretch dollars like they were made of elastic. Rent was due in 5 days. The electric bill was late, and Lily had grown out of her sneakers again. But tomorrow was picnic day, and he was going to make it happen no matter what. He jotted down a grocery list on a torn receipt: bread, peanut butter, jelly, juice boxes, apples, maybe chips if they're on sale. His pen hovered over the page. He wanted to add something sweet, maybe cookies or those frosted animal crackers Lily loved. But he crossed it out and kept moving. At the shop, business was slow, too slow. 2 cars sat half-finished in the bay, waiting on parts that hadn't come in yet. A third customer had called to cancel a scheduled oil change, saying their cousin would do it cheaper. Jack sighed and rubbed his temples. He couldn't afford to close the shop, not even for half a day. But Saturday mornings were usually quiet. He'd risk it, just this once. By mid-afternoon, he slipped away to the discount grocer down the road, still wearing his grease-streaked coveralls. He pushed a wobbly cart past rows of dented cans and off-brand cereal, hunting for deals. Every item he picked up, he weighed in his mind cost versus joy. Would Lily notice if the juice boxes weren't the ones with the cartoon animals? Probably not. Would she miss the cookies? Maybe. He tossed in a small pack anyway and didn't look at the price. He paid in cash, the kind of crumpled bills and coins that said this purchase had been scraped together from coat pockets and glove compartments. As he stepped outside, grocery bag in hand, the late sun glinted off the hood of his old sedan. It was still holding together, barely, just like him, that night. He hid the grocery bag in the cupboard so Lily wouldn't see it early. She was already asleep, curled in a blanket on the couch, a book slipping from her hand. Jack leaned down, brushed her hair back, and whispered, "We're going to have our picnic, kiddo. Promise." Saturday morning arrived with a pale sun and the kind of soft breeze that made everything feel a little more possible. Jack stood in the kitchen, jangling the handful of coins in his pocket like they were lucky charms. He had a few crumpled coupons tucked in his wallet and a mental list memorized down to the last detail. It wasn't much, but it was enough for today, at least. Lily bounded into the room wearing a too-small jacket and mismatched socks, her excitement radiating like a light bulb. "Are we still going to the store before the picnic?" she asked, already grabbing her little canvas tote bag like she was preparing for a grand adventure. "You bet," Jack said, smiling through the tension that never quite left his chest. "But only if you're my official shopping assistant," she saluted dramatically. "Sir? Yes, sir." The grocery store was already buzzing when they pulled into the parking lot. Jack parked far from the entrance, habit from years of protecting his car's temperamental engine from door dings and careless drivers. They walked in together, hand in hand, like they were stepping into something sacred, inside. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the speakers played tinny pop music that Lily hummed along with. Jack guided the cart down the aisles slowly, keeping one eye on prices and another on his daughter's face. He'd let her pick the sandwich bread, only the soft kind, daddy in the color of the juice boxes, purple, because purple tastes better. When they reached the cookie aisle, she looked up at him with a question already forming in her eyes. He crouched beside her, holding up a coupon like a winning lottery ticket. "If we play our cards right," he said, "we might be able to swing some of those frosted animal crackers you like." Her grin nearly split her face. "Best day ever." At checkout, Jack laid out the exact change coins, crumpled bills, a few folded coupons while Lily chatted happily with the clerk about the big secret picnic they were planning. No one in line seemed to mind. Walking out, groceries in hand and sunlight warming their shoulders. Jack glanced down at his daughter. She was skipping beside him, clutching her little tote like it held treasure. It wasn't about what they bought. It was about the feeling that today, even in the smallest way, he'd made something special happen. Willow Park was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that only existed just after sunrise, before the joggers showed up, before kids spilled onto playgrounds, before the city remembered it was supposed to be busy. Jack's old sedan rumbled gently into the parking lot, coughing once as it shut off, then fell silent. He exhaled, gripping the wheel for a second before turning to Lily. "You ready, picnic queen?" Lily nodded so hard her ponytail bounced. "I brought the napkins and the animal crackers." "Well then, we're officially good to go." They walked across the dew-kissed grass, Lily leading the way like she'd memorized a map no one else could see. She stopped suddenly at a gentle rise near the lake. Sunny, shaded just enough by a willow tree, and perfectly empty. "Here," she declared, spinning in a slow circle. "This is the perfect spot." Jack smiled and set down their bag. He shook out the red and white checkered blanket he'd found buried in the hall closet, still smelling faintly of cedar in summertime, and spread it across the grass. Lily plopped down with a contented sigh, like she'd just claimed a throne. He pulled out their humble feast peanut butter and jelly sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Juice boxes still cool from the fridge, 2 slightly bruised apples, and the crown jewel animal crackers in a clear sandwich bag. Lily gasped when he placed them in the center of the blanket like fine china. "I declare this the best picnic ever," she said, beaming up at him. Jack leaned back, one hand bracing behind him, eyes drifting out over the lake. Ducks floated lazily in the distance, and the breeze rustled the leaves above them. For the first time in a long time, the noise in his head quieted. What he didn't see, what neither of them saw, was the small white sign staked into the ground just a few feet behind them, the word "reserved" printed in bold black letters. Below it, the name Eleanor Wright. Jack reached for a sandwich and passed one to Lily. "Cheers," he said, tapping hers gently with his. She giggled. "To best days ever." Neither of them noticed the black SUV that had just turned into the lot at the far end of the park. The first bite of Lily's sandwich hadn't even made it to her mouth when Jack noticed the 3 men. They emerged from the far side of the park path, walking in a tight formation, black dress shoes crunching the gravel, pressed slacks swaying in rhythm. Each of them wearing an earpiece and the kind of expression that didn't leave room for small talk. Jack's stomach sank before he could place why. They didn't belong here. Not with their tailored suits and mirrored sunglasses. Not in a sleepy public park on a Saturday morning. He instinctively shifted, subtly placing himself between them and Lily, though she remained blissfully unaware, still holding her sandwich like it was treasure. "Sir," the tallest one said as they stopped just at the edge of the blanket. His voice was clipped, polished, not rude, but not friendly either. "I'm going to have to ask you to move." Jack blinked. "Come again." "This area is reserved." Jack looked around. The grass was wide and open. Other families were scattered under trees and on benches. "Reserved, it's a public park." One of the other men pointed behind him to the small white sign Jack hadn't noticed earlier. There it was, half hidden in the tall grass behind their blanket. "Reserved. This entire space is booked for a private party scheduled to begin shortly," the third man read flatly. Like the word itself should have been obvious. Jack's jaw tightened. He glanced at Lily, now looking up at the men with wide eyes. Sandwich paused midair. Her smile had vanished. "We're just having a little picnic," Jack said, keeping his voice even. "We won't be long. Thought we'd come early. Beat the crowds." The first man's jaw ticked. "Sir, I understand, but Ms. Wright's instructions were clear. This area needs to be cleared before her arrival." Jack stood slowly, brushing crumbs from his jeans. "Right, of course." Lily tugged at his sleeve. "But Dad," he forced a smile down at her. "It's okay, Bug. We'll find another spot." As he began packing up their things, the tallest man spoke again, this time more awkwardly. "If it's any consolation, you picked the nicest spot in the park." Jack didn't answer. He just nodded once, quietly folding the checkered blanket as the sound of tires on gravel echoed behind them. The black SUV had arrived. The SUV door opened with a soft click, and out stepped a woman in white. Not just white immaculate, crisp tailored slacks, a silky blouse, and dark sunglasses that reflected the sky. Her heels made no sound as they touched the grass, but somehow her presence rippled across the park like a stone dropped into still water. Jack had just zipped up the lunch bag when he noticed the men straightening, the tallest of them stepping aside like clockwork, clearing a path. "That's her," one of them muttered under his breath. "Ms. Wright." Jack turned fully now, squinting against the sunlight. Eleanor Wright. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but it didn't click until he caught a glimpse of her face beneath the sunglasses, flawless. Sharp but not cold. He'd seen her once on a magazine cover at the garage. Something about the new face of tech and how she'd turned a family empire into a billion-dollar machine. And here she was, at the park, in front of their half-eaten sandwiches and a crumpled napkin with jelly on it. Eleanor paused, her gaze flicking to the blanket, to the food, to Lily clutching her juice box like it was a lifeline, then to Jack's sweat-darkened t-shirt, worn jeans, hands still stained faintly with grease, her head tilted slightly. Just a fraction, calculating, curious. "Everything all right?" she asked, her voice low, smooth like silk wrapped around steel. The lead man stepped forward. "Yes, ma'am. Just a small delay. These folks didn't realize the space was reserved. They're moving now." Jack cleared his throat. "Didn't mean to step on anyone's plans. We thought it was open." Eleanor looked at him for a beat longer than was comfortable, then turned her attention to Lily. "Nice spot you picked," she said gently. Lily blinked up at her, cheeks pink. "It has the best shade." A ghost of a smile crossed Eleanor's lips. "It does." Jack should have felt embarrassed, maybe even a little angry at how casually this woman could own a slice of public space. But instead, what he felt was something stranger, like the moment wasn't over, like she wasn't done with them yet. The men waited for her to give the final word, but she simply looked back at the blanket, the cookies, the girl, and said, "Give us a moment." Eleanor stood at the edge of the blanket, arms loosely crossed, her expression unreadable behind her dark sunglasses. The breeze teased a strand of hair from her tight ponytail, but she didn't move to fix it. Jack, still crouched near the picnic bag, looked up slowly, unsure if he should speak or wait for her to pass judgment. Her security team hovered behind her like shadows, tense and ready, but she wasn't tense. Not exactly, more observant, like she was trying to understand something that didn't fit. Lily, unaware of the invisible weight between the adults, popped a grape into her mouth and tilted her head. "Are you coming to the picnic too?" Jack's breath caught. Eleanor blinked, and for the first time, she lowered her sunglasses slightly. Her eyes were sharp, sea glass green, and full of something that didn't match the rest of her carefully curated image. Not power, not annoyance, curiosity. "I might be," she said softly. One of the security guards stepped forward. "Ms. Right." She raised a hand, silencing him with barely a glance. Her eyes stayed on Lily. Jack stood, slow and cautious, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, I didn't know this area was reserved. We'll move. It's not a problem." Eleanor looked at him then. Really looked. His face was weathered in that quiet working man way, not old, but worn. His shirt was faded, and his jeans had a small tear at the knee. Honest clothes. Hands that looked like they'd fixed 1,000 things no one else could. She didn't see defiance in him, just a father trying to give his daughter a moment of something normal. She took a breath. "How long were you planning to stay?" Jack shrugged. "Just long enough to make a memory." Something flickered in her expression, faint, almost imperceptible. A tightening around the mouth, a softening around the eyes. She nodded once and stepped forward, lowering herself into a crouch beside Lily. "Well then," she said, brushing a blade of grass from her sleeve, "I'd hate to interrupt something that matters." Jack stood frozen. The guards exchanged looks, but Lily just grinned and offered her a cookie. Eleanor took it without hesitation, and just like that, the woman in white stayed. Eleanor sat on the edge of the checkered blanket like she'd never worn a suit worth more than Jack's monthly income. Her hands rested lightly in her lap, fingers curled, posture still too perfect to look natural on grass. But she wasn't rushing to leave. Lily was completely unfazed by the quiet power sitting across from her. She scooted forward, unwrapping a second peanut butter and jelly sandwich with meticulous care, then held it out with both hands like a gift. "Do you want one, Dad made extras?" she said brightly. Jack opened his mouth to interject. Wasn't sure if billionaires ate PB&J from slightly squished wax paper, but Eleanor's hand was already reaching out. "Thank you," she said, accepting the sandwich with a grace that made the moment feel oddly formal. Her gaze flicked briefly to Jack, then settled back on Lily. "It's been a while since someone offered me lunch without an agenda." Lily grinned, proud. "They're my favorite. We always use the kind of jelly with seeds because it tastes more real." Eleanor smiled small. Careful, but it was real. "Sounds like a solid choice." Jack sat again, slower this time, still unsure whether this was happening or if he was hallucinating from budget stress and too little sleep. He watched as Eleanor inspected the sandwich like it was an artifact from another life, then took a bite. Her eyes closed just briefly, and for a moment, she looked more like a woman than a headline. "It's good," she said, almost surprised. Lily nodded. "Told you." Eleanor glanced down at the crumbs in her lap, brushed them off with a quiet laugh. And Jack saw it, that flicker of something soft behind her polished exterior. A person, tired, maybe, lonely, even. Whatever armor she walked in with had started to loosen. Jack broke the silence gently. "Didn't think we'd be having a picnic with royalty this morning." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Is that what I am?" Lily answered for him. "You have guards and sunglasses and fancy shoes. That makes you important." Eleanor tilted her head. "Well, I suppose it does." But her eyes lingered on Lily, and for the first time in a long while, her smile didn't look like it had been practiced. The guards didn't know what to do. They stood just beyond the shade of the willow tree, exchanging silent looks, shifting their weight in expensive shoes that weren't made for grass. One of them cleared his throat softly, waiting for a cue from Eleanor. It never came. Instead, she sat a little straighter, brushing invisible lint from her blouse before setting her half-eaten sandwich on a napkin. Then, with deliberate calm, she looked at Jack and said, "Mind if I stay a little longer?" Jack blinked. "You mean here?" She nodded once. "It's been a long week, and this is the first quiet moment I've had in a while." Jack opened his mouth to respond but couldn't quite find the words, not because he didn't want her there, but because it felt like a question no one like her should have to ask. She could buy the whole park if she wanted, and yet here she was, waiting for his permission. Lily broke the moment with a simple, enthusiastic, "Yes." Eleanor's mouth twitched into a smile. "Well then," she said softly, shifting on the blanket. "Thank you." She removed her sunglasses, setting them gently beside her, and Jack saw her eyes clearly for the first time, green and alert, but not cold, if anything. She looked relieved, as though sitting here in the middle of a low-budget picnic with a mechanic and his daughter gave her some kind of space she didn't even know she needed. Lily held up the cookie bag again. "You can have another one. There's plenty." Eleanor reached in and took a frosted elephant, studying it for a second before popping it into her mouth. "I don't remember the last time I had one of these." "They're good, huh?" Lily grinned. "Surprisingly," Eleanor said, chuckling and charmingly nostalgic. Jack leaned back on his elbows, watching the two of them. It was surreal. 10 minutes ago, he was packing up to avoid security. Now the billionaire tech CEO was sitting cross-legged on his old picnic blanket, munching animal crackers like she belonged. For once, he didn't overthink it. He just let the moment be. "Welcome to the best picnic in town," he said, tipping an invisible hat. Eleanor smiled. "I believe you." By late morning, the sun had climbed higher, casting warm light over the lakeside and turning the blades of grass into gold-tipped threads. The park was beginning to stir. More families arrived with strollers and fold-out chairs. Joggers looped the walking path, and a few curious dog walkers slowed their pace near the willow tree, each doing the same subtle double take when they noticed her Eleanor Wright, sitting cross-legged on a checkered blanket. eating a peanut butter and jelly sandwich off a paper plate. Jack noticed the glances, the hushed whispers, the way some phones half lifted before their owners second-guessed themselves. But Eleanor didn't seem to care. She reached for a juice box, poked the straw in with minimal fuss, and sipped like it was a fine vintage. "This is charming," she said after a beat, glancing around. "The last lunch I had was a $300 salad served on a boardroom table with people arguing about server architecture." Jack chuckled. "Well, this is fresh off the Reynolds kitchen counter. No arguments, just jelly and animal crackers," Lily beamed. "Of course," Eleanor smiled down at the little girl. The pièce de résistance. Across the park, her security team kept a wide perimeter, visibly uncomfortable, eyes scanning every movement, unsure whether to intervene or disappear. A man in a navy blazer spoke into his earpiece, murmuring something urgent. Another kept checking a tablet, as if hoping the surreal scene in front of him might resolve itself. Eleanor caught the looks, glanced over her shoulder, and gave a small shake of her head. It was enough to make them stand down physically. At least, their confusion lingered like fog. Meanwhile, Lily handed Eleanor a paper napkin, giggling when it tore a little. "Sorry, that one's kind of crinkly." "It's perfect," Eleanor said, carefully dabbing the corner of her mouth. Jack watched her, still trying to process the strange alchemy happening before him. A woman born into fortune, whose face had graced magazines and investor conferences, now sitting barefoot on his old blanket, eating the most humble meal a father could piece together with coins and coupons. It wasn't just surprising, it was human, and that, more than anything, was what made it feel real. The sun had settled high above the trees, filtering through the willow branches in lazy, dappled patterns. The lake shimmered quietly, ducks gliding past in tight formation, and the low hum of park life carried on in the background, muffled conversations. The creak of a stroller wheel, a burst of laughter from the playground down the path. But beneath the tree, it was still peaceful in a way that felt rare. Eleanor sat with her legs stretched out on the edge of the blanket, one hand resting on the grass, the other loosely holding the stem of an empty juice box. Her heels had been quietly kicked off sometime during the last hour, and she tucked her feet under her like she belonged there. Jack leaned back on his elbows beside her, watching as Lily tried to stack animal crackers into a tower. She'd made it to 4 before they toppled, sending her into a fit of giggles that rang out like music. Eleanor smiled softly, almost sadly. "You know," she said, not quite looking at Jack, "I came here to be alone." Jack turned his head toward her. "Funny place to look for solitude." She gave a light shrug. "Not when you own the permits and can reserve half a park." "Touché," he said, smiling. She exhaled slowly, gaze still fixed on the rippling lake. "I had 6 meetings yesterday, one right after the other. The last one ended with a board member telling me I was too emotional to be CEO because I said no without smiling." Jack frowned. "Sounds like someone who's never fixed a carburetor." That made her laugh, a real one this time, short and surprised. "Yeah, I don't think they've ever fixed much of anything." There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just open. "When I heard Lily laugh," she continued, her voice lower now, almost reverent, "it cut through everything, the emails, the press, the noise in my head. For a second, it was just that sound, clear, untouched." Jack glanced at her, and for the first time, he saw it under the designer blouse and polished words, the weight she carried, the kind you couldn't measure in dollars. "You ever get that?" she asked. He looked out at the water, then down at Lily, now sorting crackers into pretend teams. "Every day," as he said. "That's why I keep showing up." Eleanor nodded, quiet. The breeze tugged gently at her hair, and for a little while longer, she stayed right there. It started with a single photo. Someone across the park had taken it, blurry but unmistakable. Eleanor Wright, barefoot on a checkered picnic blanket, sipping from a juice box and smiling down at a little girl with pigtails and mismatched socks. A man sat beside them, rugged and unpolished in his grease-streaked jeans, laughing at something the girl had said. The caption read, "Billionaire CEO Eleanor Wright seen in local park with mystery man and child. Double life." By the time Jack was locking up the shop Sunday evening, the photo had already made its rounds. Social media was ablaze. Gossip blogs were clawing for details. Business sites ran headlines that walked the line between intrigue and scandal. Who is the mechanic beside Eleanor Wright? Tech-era CEO seen playing house in public park. Picnic or PR stunt internet reacts to Wright's down-to-earth display? Jack didn't notice at first. He was focused on cleaning up peanut butter smudges from Lily's car seat and sorting through laundry. It wasn't until his buddy Frank from the tire shop sent him a link that the weight of it hit. He sat on the couch, staring at the screen. The photo looked surreal, like someone had taken a dream and thrown it under a microscope. There was Lily, grinning up at Eleanor, and there was him, caught mid-laugh, unguarded, exposed. His phone buzzed again. A text from a former customer, then another, a voicemail from a local reporter. Someone had even left a message at the garage asking if he had a statement about what's sitting in the grass and sharing sandwiches at that moment. He heard Lily in the other room, singing to herself, completely unaware of the storm brewing just outside their front door. Miles away, in a penthouse that overlooked a skyline she'd stopped admiring years ago, Eleanor stood barefoot on cold marble floors, holding her phone. Her name was trending again, but this time it wasn't about her latest merger or speaking at a global summit. It was about them. She didn't smile, didn't panic either. She just stared at the image and whispered to no one at all. Of course they'd twist it, and somewhere beneath the noise, she wondered if she'd just ruined something quietly perfect. The next morning started the way most did, too early. Too many things to do, and not enough hands to do them. Jack rolled up the garage door just after 7, the scent of motor oil and steel already thick in the air. The town was still waking up, the hum of delivery trucks and distant barking dogs blending into the morning fog. He set his coffee on the workbench and reached for the clipboard hanging by the office door, already mentally juggling jobs in his head. The Corolla needed new brake pads. Jenkins' truck was still idling rough, and the parts shipment delayed again wasn't going to fix itself. He was elbow deep in the hood of an old Civic when he heard the sound, not the usual clunk of tired engines or the rattle of loose mufflers. This was smoother, sleek, a low, buttery purr that didn't belong on this side of town. He straightened just in time to see it pull into the lot, a vintage cherry red convertible with gleaming chrome, spotless rims, and a kind of quiet swagger that made the other cars look like junkyard extras. And behind the wheel, Eleanor Wright. She stepped out like she had every right to be there, which, technically, she did. But something in her stance said she knew this wasn't her world. Not exactly. Still, she didn't hesitate. Jack wiped his hands on a rag and stepped forward. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon," he said, half a smile tugging at his mouth. She slid her sunglasses up into her hair. "Wasn't planning to be here, but then my convertible decided it needed a dramatic flair. Won't shift out a second." He glanced at the car. "Classic build. She's beautiful, also temperamental, like most beautiful things." That pulled a soft chuckle from her. "You want to take a look?" She hesitated, then nodded. "If you're not too busy." Jack tilted his head, gesturing to the mostly empty lot. "For you, I think I can clear some time." She smiled, tired, grateful, and maybe a little uncertain. "Thanks, Jack." And just like that, Eleanor Wright handed him the keys, not just to her car, but maybe, unintentionally, to something much bigger. The convertible's hood was up, revealing a pristine but stubborn engine that refused to play nice. Jack leaned over it with a practiced eye, socket wrench in one hand, brow furrowed in quiet focus. Eleanor stood a few feet away, arms crossed, the wind teasing a few strands of her hair loose from a low ponytail. Her heels had been swapped for white sneakers still spotless, but at least pretending to be casual. "So," she said, watching as he adjusted a throttle cable, You talk to all your clients this much, or just the ones who crash your picnics? Jack smirked, not looking up. Only the ones who bring their own security detail. She let out a soft laugh, then glanced around the garage at the dented file cabinet, the patched-up office door, the faded family photo thumbtacked to the bulletin board behind the desk. This place, she said, it feels like it's held together with determination and duct tape. Don't underestimate the power of duct tape, he added. Eleanor's smile faded slightly. I envy it. You know. He paused, finally glancing up. What? This, she said, motioning around the garage. You fix what's broken. You see the problem. You get your hands dirty, and then it works again. There's something honest about it. Jack tightened a bolt, then leaned back, wiping his hands on a rag. You saying billionaires don't fix things? I'm saying billionaires hide things, spin them, paint over the cracks until the foundation caves in. The silence hung for a moment. Not heavy, but full. She looked down at her hands, fingers playing with the edge of her sleeve. It's exhausting, pretending to be fine all the time. Jack rested against the edge of the car. You don't have to pretend here. She met his eyes, and something flickered there. Tiredness. Yes, but also a kind of fragile honesty. What about you? She asked. Always calm, always joking. Ever pretend? Jack looked toward the photo of him and Lily. Every day, he said quietly. You don't get the luxury of falling apart when a 7-year-old's watching. Eleanor nodded slowly. Yeah, she murmured. I know that feeling. And for a moment, surrounded by engine grease and dust and the faint hum of the radio, two people from entirely different worlds sat in the same silence, and it felt like peace. The drawing was folded twice, slightly crinkled at the edges, with a faint smudge of grape jelly near the bottom corner. It had been tucked carefully into Lily's backpack, hidden between a library book and a ziplock of broken crayons. Jack only found it when he was packing her lunch that morning, and he'd smiled the second he saw it. Crayon lines danced across the page in bright, cheerful colors: blue sky, green grass, a red and white blanket stretched beneath a crooked tree. In the center of it all stood 3 stick figures. One was unmistakably Lily Big Ponytails. Pink dress, wide smile. Beside her was a taller figure with short brown hair and a blue shirt. Jack, of course. And next to them, wearing a long yellow dress with a sparkling silver crown drawn in with glitter glue, stood the Picnic Princess. That's what Lily had written beneath it, in her best second-grade handwriting. The Picnic Princess. Jack showed it to her when she came into the kitchen, barefoot and yawning. You made this. Lily nodded, already reaching for the cereal box. Yeah, it's for her. For Eleanor. Mm-hmm. She poured a generous heap of cereal. She said she didn't get to color much as a kid, and I figured maybe she'd like a picture, so she won't forget. Jack looked down at the paper again. The crown was a little off-center. The arms were stick straight, but somehow it was perfect. Later that afternoon, when Eleanor stopped by to pick up her fixed convertible, he handed it to her in an envelope without a word. She opened it right there by the counter, and something in her expression shifted, the kind of shift that wasn't meant for cameras or press releases. A breath caught, a blink that lasted a little longer than normal. She made this for me, she asked quietly. Jack nodded. Said it was so you wouldn't forget the picnic. Eleanor traced a finger over the drawing, landing gently on the glittery crown. I won't, she said, folding it carefully, not too tight, and sliding it into the inside pocket of her leather bag. She zipped it shut, pressed the flap down, and patted it once. Some things, she said softly, you carry close. The convertible purred like a dream as Eleanor eased it into the shop lot. The engine's once stubborn growl now a smooth, elegant hum. Jack wiped his hands on a rag and stepped out from beneath the hood of an old Ford. Raising an eyebrow as she parked with practiced grace, she stepped out, no sunglasses this time. Just clear eyes and a subtle smile that didn't feel like it belonged to the woman plastered across magazine covers. He expected her to thank him again for the repair. Maybe offer a ride around the block to show off the smooth shift between gears. What he didn't expect was the manila folder she pulled from her bag. "I have something for you," she said, holding it out. Jack hesitated before taking it. It felt heavier than paper should. "Open it," she added. Inside crisp documents, letterhead with a logo he recognized. Right Heritage Division, a formal contract, terms, compensation, responsibilities, a salary that made his stomach flip. "What is this?" he asked, flipping pages slowly. "I want you to work for me," Eleanor said plainly. "Full-time, restoring, maintaining, and managing my vintage collection. You'd have your own garage on the estate, access to anything you need, resources, staff, everything." Jack blinked. "You're serious?" "I don't make offers I don't intend to follow through on." He stared down at the folder. The numbers alone were staggering. Steady income, benefits, a future that didn't depend on whether Jenkins' truck stalled again or whether the rent could be paid on time. But it also meant leaving, shutting down the shop, the place he'd built from rust and hope, the one with the creaky office chair and the wall of photos. It meant pulling Lily out of the neighborhood she'd grown up in, trading quiet struggle for luxury and uncertainty. Eleanor saw the hesitation in his eyes. "I'm not trying to take anything from you," she said, "but I see talent when it's right in front of me. And I'd rather give you a better way to use it than watch you burn out fixing busted mufflers for people who don't pay on time." Jack looked up at her, heart thrumming. It was everything he thought he'd wanted. But was it everything he needed? Word got around fast in Riverdale. Faster than Jack expected. Faster than he liked. By Monday morning, the town might as well have held a press conference. Some people found out through whispers at the diner. Others from the barber shop where Eleanor's cherry-red convertible had become the talk of the hour. A few had seen the news online. Those same blurry picnic photos now paired with headlines like, "Local mechanic offered life-changing deal by billionaire heiress." And just like that, everyone had an opinion. At the garage, Frank stopped by with a coffee and a raised brow. "So it's true you're leaving this place behind for some castle on a hill?" Jack leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. "Didn't say I was leaving anything, just weighing my options." "Man, come on," Frank said, shaking his head with a grin. "You're the only guy I know who gets handed the golden ticket and hesitates." But not everyone saw it as a golden ticket. At the grocery store, Mrs. Fain, the elderly woman who came in every 3 months with her beat-up Buick, clucked her tongue as she handed over a coupon. "That woman doesn't live in our world. Jack, people like that always take more than they give." At school pickup, one of the other parents leaned over with a polite smile too tight to be sincere. "So I guess we'll be seeing less of you. Or none at all, once you've moved on up." Jack just nodded, the weight in his chest building with every interaction. Even the regulars at Duffy's bar weighed in. Some called him crazy for waiting. Others called him reckless for even considering it. "You think she'll stick around?" someone muttered under their breath. "Or is this just her latest charity project?" By the time Jack sat down at home that night, Lily curled up beside him, drawing another picture this time, of a house with a big garage and a tire swing out front. He was drowning in noise. He looked at her calm, her certainty, her innocence. Everyone else saw a headline, a paycheck, a risk. But Lily just saw her dad, and he realized, whatever choice he made, it had to be for them, not the whispers. The envelope was thick, the kind of paper that felt more like fabric, with gold trim and a wax seal that seemed almost absurdly formal. Jack found it stuck between the shop's bills, slipped through the mail slot sometime during the afternoon. No return address, just his name in graceful handwriting across the front. He opened it with grease-streaked fingers, careful not to smudge the ink. Inside was an invitation. Elegant script. "Eleanor Wright requests the pleasure of your company at the Wright Foundation Winter Gala. Black tie Friday evening. 7 p.m., the Grand Hotel Ballroom, and beneath it, a handwritten note. I'd love for you to bring Lily." He stared at the card like it might suddenly explain itself. It didn't. Later that night, he placed it on the kitchen table while Lily munched on her mac and cheese, swinging her feet beneath the chair. "What's that?" she asked, eyeing the fancy paper. Jack exhaled. "We've been invited to a fancy party." Lily's eyes widened. "Like with dresses and chandeliers and dancing." "Something like that," she gasped, nearly dropping her spoon. "Are we going?" He hesitated. "I don't know, bug. It's not really our kind of thing. But she asked us. Both of us." That part stuck with him. Eleanor could have invited just him, but she hadn't. She'd asked for Lily too, as if she understood that they were a package deal. No version of Jack came without his daughter. Lily leaned forward, eyes shining. "Can I wear sparkles?" Jack laughed despite himself. "You can wear all the sparkles." She squealed and jumped down from the chair, racing to her room to dig through her makeshift dress-up box. But as she disappeared down the hall, Jack picked up the invitation again, running his thumb over the raised letters. Black tie. He didn't even own a proper tie, let alone one that could blend in with tuxedos and champagne towers. The excitement in Lily's voice still echoed through the apartment, and Jack, he felt something between pride and panic, because he knew how to fix engines, but he didn't know how to walk into a room where people already believed he didn't belong. The Grand Hotel glowed like something out of a fairy tale, every window lit, every marble column wrapped in winter white garlands and tiny golden lights. The valet raised an eyebrow when Jack pulled up in his weathered sedan, but said nothing as he took the keys with a polite nod. Jack stepped out in a borrowed suit navy, a little tight in the shoulders, sleeves a touch too short, but clean, pressed, and topped off with a dark tie he'd spent 20 frustrating minutes trying to knot. Beside him, Lily practically shimmered in a hand-me-down dress covered in sequins, her curls pinned back with glittery barrettes. She clutched his hand with a kind of awestruck wonder that made the moment feel worth every bit of discomfort. Inside, the ballroom was a cathedral of wealth crystal chandeliers spilled light like champagne. Music from a live quartet danced over the sound of clinking glasses and the low hum of conversation. The people glittered just as much as the decor tailored tuxedos, silk gowns, heels that clicked like punctuation marks on marble floors. Jack swallowed hard, shoulders tightening as they stepped through the grand archway. He didn't belong here. That much was obvious. He could already feel the glances, the quiet sizing up, the polite smiles. "Dad," Lily whispered, tugging his hand. "It's like a princess castle." He knelt beside her, adjusting her sparkly headband. "That's because you are a princess tonight, kiddo." Her face lit up. "Now that," a familiar voice said, warm and amused, "is exactly how to arrive." Jack turned, and there she was. Eleanor, elegant in an off-the-shoulder black gown, her hair swept into soft waves, diamond studs catching the light. But her smile, that was what disarmed him. Not rehearsed, not formal, just real. "You clean up well," she said, eyes sweeping over him with a softness that made his pulse stutter. "You look—" He trailed off, then gave a quiet, honest, "Wow." She held out her hand. "Dance with me." He hesitated, glancing at the swirling crowd. "I don't know the steps," he admitted. "I'll teach you," she said, her voice low, eyes steady, and before he could talk himself out of it. Jack took her hand. It was warm, certain, unshaking, and as she pulled him gently onto the dance floor, everything else, the whispers, the stares, the polished perfection, began to fade into the background. The article hit the internet just before sunrise, buried halfway down the entertainment site's homepage beneath celebrity breakups and red carpet fashion critiques. But by mid-morning, it had made its rounds faster than wildfire, faster than anyone could control. Eleanor Wright's mystery man, widowed mechanic and liability. Jack first saw it when Frank texted him the link with nothing but a grim-faced emoji. He clicked it reluctantly, his stomach already tightening. The headline was followed by a grainy shot from the gala Jack in his too-tight suit. Eleanor's hand on his arm, both of them mid-laugh. Below that, the tone shifted, colder, crueler. The piece laid everything bare: his wife's death in a car accident 7 years ago. The mountain of medical bills that followed, the eviction notice he once fought off by working double shifts and pawning his wedding ring, his small shops near closure during the worst of the pandemic, even Lily's early days in a community daycare program had been dragged into the light. Each fact twisted just enough to sting. The writer painted a picture not of resilience, but of a man clinging to the coattails of someone powerful. From auto shop to ballroom has Wright's taste in charity extended to her personal life. The closing line asked. By the time Jack reached the end, his ears were ringing. He didn't care that they called him poor. He'd lived it, survived it, but dragging Lily into it, digging through the most painful chapter of his life for clicks and curiosity that was different. The garage phone rang off the hook all morning. Reporters, bloggers, a news crew even showed up outside, snapping photos of the peeling paint on his garage sign like it told them something about his soul. Jack shut the door, locked it, closed the shop early without a word. When he picked up Lily from school, she asked why her friend's mom said their picture was on the internet. He smiled the way only a dad could, forced, practiced, hollow, and told her he'd explain later. But inside, a storm was already brewing, because it wasn't just about embarrassment. It was about what happened when your real life messy, flawed, honest was shoved under a spotlight that never asked your permission. Eleanor sat in her office, high above the city where the skyline stretched like a painting and the world below felt smaller than it was. The windows were tinted, the lights dimmed, but the glare from her phone screen felt blinding. Her name was trending again. So was Jack's, and Lily's. She hadn't planned for this. The gala had been a risk. Sure, but she'd thought it through, or she'd convinced herself she had. A quiet invitation, a soft entry into her world. One evening of simple warmth in a place full of cold glass and sharper smiles. But the internet didn't care about warmth. It cared about weakness, about headlines. And now Jack and his daughter were being dissected in places they'd never asked to be seen. She closed her eyes and leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled against her lips. There had been a meeting that morning, her PR team, suits and screens and carefully worded advice. One had said gently, "It's not just about your image. It's about the foundation, the board, the investors," another said. Not so gently. "He's not safe. You have to distance yourself." But it wasn't just about her. It was about Lily, a little girl who still believed in glitter and juice boxes and princess picnics. A little girl now being whispered about in circles she should never have to imagine. Eleanor opened the drawer of her desk and pulled out the drawing, Lily's masterpiece. The picnic princess, crown and all, stick arms stretched toward a crooked, smiling sun. She ran her thumb over the glitter-glued crown and felt something like shame. She hadn't reached out since the article. She hadn't returned Jack's call. Not because she was angry, but because she was scared not of him, of what her life might do to his, because for all her power, she couldn't protect them from the machine she lived inside. And the truth she kept circling, but hadn't yet said aloud, echoed now like thunder. Maybe the best thing she could do for them was walk away. And so, for the first time since that morning in the park, Eleanor stayed silent. The wind had picked up that evening, scattering leaves across the sidewalk and rattling the rusted sign outside Jack's garage. He sat on the front steps of their apartment, a mug of lukewarm coffee in his hands, staring out at nothing. Lily was inside, humming to herself as she colored, oblivious to the noise swirling just beyond their walls. It had been 3 days since the article. 3 days of flashing cameras parked across the street, of phone calls he didn't answer, of people pretending to be curious when what they really wanted was a story, and 3 days of silence from Eleanor. He hadn't blamed her. Not really. Not when the entire world was watching, waiting for her to make a move. He imagined the pressure, the headlines, the lawyers in glass offices telling her what was best for her image, and maybe they were right. Maybe keeping her distance was the safest thing, but that didn't make it hurt less. He thought about calling her again. He thought about driving to her office, demanding to know why everything had changed so fast. But every time he looked at Lily soft-eyed, Wide smiling Lily, he remembered what this had always been about: keeping her safe, keeping her whole. That meant protecting her from the noise, from the clicks, from people who twisted kindness into spectacle and turned simple joy into something scandalous. That night, he sat her down at the kitchen table. "Hey, Bug," he said gently. "Remember that fancy garage job we talked about?" She looked up from her drawing. "The one with the cool cars." He nodded. "I think I'm going to say no." Her eyes widened. "Why?" Jack hesitated, choosing his words with care. "Because sometimes big things come with big problems. And right now, I think what we need is small, safe, us." Lily blinked, then slowly nodded. "Okay," she said. "As long as we still do picnics." He smiled. "Always." He tucked her in that night, brushing a curl from her forehead. And as she drifted off to sleep, Jack sat beside her in the quiet dark, feeling the weight of a decision that wasn't easy but was necessary. Sometimes choosing peace meant walking away from something good before it could break you. The park looked smaller without them. Eleanor stepped out of the town car and pulled her coat tighter around her, the early evening chill settling into her bones like regret. The sun hung low on the horizon, bleeding soft gold into the sky, but it didn't offer much warmth. The willow tree swayed gently in the breeze, its long branches dancing like they remembered laughter that wasn't there anymore. She walked slowly, her heels crunching softly over the gravel path. No guards, no assistant, no distractions. Just her and the hollow ache she hadn't managed to shake since the silence between her and Jack had grown too wide to cross. When she reached the spot, the patch of grass where the checkered blanket had once been, she stopped. The ground was bare now, scattered with brittle leaves and a few forgotten feathers from the ducks that still wandered the lake's edge. The reserve sign was gone. No security perimeter, no curious stares. Just the echo of a moment that had felt like something real. She sat on the cold wooden bench, one leg crossed over the other, her hands resting on her lap. For a while, she just stared at the water, letting the quiet settle in her chest. She could still hear Lily's laughter in her memory, bright and unfiltered. She could see Jack leaning back on his elbows, smiling with the kind of ease she'd never seen at any gala, in any boardroom. And now it was gone, not because she didn't want it, but because she hadn't known how to hold it without breaking it. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the folded piece of paper she hadn't stopped carrying Lily's drawing. The picnic princess. She smoothed it out gently on her lap, brushing her thumb over the glitter glue crown. "I should have fought harder," she whispered. A duck quacked in the distance, a soft sound that was met with silence. Eleanor sat there until the sun slipped below the treetops, painting the lake in fading light. When she finally stood, the spot remained empty, untouched, but in her pocket, she carried the only proof it had ever been real. The letter was written in purple ink on lined notebook paper, the kind with wide margins and little flowers drawn in the corners. Lily had taken her time with it, tongue poking out as she carefully looped her letters, asking Jack to help her spell a few big words. She didn't tell him everything she was writing, just that it was important. He watched her from the kitchen, a gentle ache in his chest as she folded the paper and sealed it in an envelope she had decorated with glitter stickers and a tiny crooked heart. "Do you think she'll get it?" Lily asked, holding it up like it was something sacred. Jack nodded. "Yeah, Bug. I think she really needs it." They walked to the post box together, and Lily slid the letter in with both hands, standing on tiptoe to be sure it dropped all the way through. She looked up at him after, satisfied, like she'd just finished something only she could do. "I hope it makes her feel better," she said softly. Miles away, in the glass and steel quiet of her penthouse, Eleanor opened the mailbox in her private office without much thought. It was mostly formal invitations, sealed contracts, things that passed through her life without leaving a mark. But one envelope stood out purple ink, glitter stickers, a name written in slightly wobbly handwriting. Miss Eleanor Wright. Her breath caught. She opened it carefully, unfolding the lined page as if it might tear from too much pressure. and then she read, "Dear Eleanor, I know sometimes people go away, like my mom did, and sometimes your heart gets real quiet, but that doesn't mean they're gone forever, because if you miss someone and you remember them really big in your heart, it's kind of like they're still there. You made me laugh and you liked my sandwich and you didn't even care that I got jelly on your shoes. That's why you're special. It's okay to miss people. My mom is still in my heart. You can be too. Love." Lily Reynolds Eleanor read it twice, then pressed the paper to her chest, eyes stinging. Sometimes children know more about healing than adults ever will. It started with a knock. Jack looked up from beneath the hood of a battered pickup truck, wiping sweat and dust from his brow. He wasn't expecting anyone. Business had been slow, and the last thing he needed was another reporter or curious passerby looking for a soundbite. He braced himself for more questions he didn't want to answer. But when he opened the garage door, what he saw wasn't a stranger. It was a truck, a brand new flatbed pulling into the lot, followed by a team in matching uniforms marked Wright Classic Auto Restoration. They moved with quiet precision, no fanfare, no flashy logos, just tools in hand and blueprints rolled under their arms. Jack stepped out, confusion hardening into cautious disbelief. The woman in the passenger seat of the lead truck stepped down first. Eleanor. She wore jeans and a soft gray sweater, her hair pulled back. No makeup, no press. Behind her, just that same calm. Sure look he remembered from the park. The one that didn't demand space. The one that offered it. "Hope you don't mind," she said, walking toward him, a folder tucked beneath her arm. "I decided it was my turn to fix something." Jack crossed his arms, blinking at the team unloading new signage, tools and fresh siding materials. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" She stopped in front of him, lifted the folder, and opened it. Inside were signed permits, contractor forms, and at the very top, deed transferred, paid in full, the building, the land, no strings. "You fixed my car," she said. "You fixed my afternoon, my head that day at the park. I didn't know how badly I needed someone to just be human with me. And Lily's letter," her voice caught, "that fixed more than I can explain." Jack looked down at the paperwork, then up at the shop, his shop, the place that had been slowly falling apart, patched up with whatever he could scrounge. Now gleaming crews were prepping new paint, new signage, everything he'd always dreamed of but couldn't reach. "You didn't have to do this," he said quietly. Eleanor smiled. "Maybe not, but you've spent your whole life fixing things for everyone else." She held out the deed. "Let someone fix something for you." The next morning, Riverdale awoke to find something transformed. What had once been Reynolds Auto Repair, weathered, tired, hanging on by a thread, now stood proud under a fresh coat of paint and a gleaming new sign, Reynolds Classic Auto Restoration. The building itself had been subtly but beautifully renovated. Overnight, the foundation reinforced, the siding replaced, the windows cleaned and resealed. Inside, the tools were still familiar, but now there were new ones, two specialized equipment for classic car restoration, a pristine workbench, lighting that didn't flicker when it rained. But what caught everyone's attention was the line of cars already waiting outside, not just everyday sedans and pickup trucks needing oil changes, but classics, a '67 Mustang, a vintage Porsche, a sleek Jaguar E-Type, and people not just locals, but collectors, enthusiasts, people who'd driven hours just to see if the rumors were true. "Is this real?" Frank asked, leaning against the doorframe, watching as Jack stared at his transformed shop in disbelief. "Tell me this is real." Jack ran his hand along the smooth surface of a new workbench. "I think it is." Frank whistled low. "So Wright Industries just handed you a classic car repair empire overnight." "Not Wright Industries," Jack corrected quietly. "Eleanor." The distinction mattered. The phone call came just after lunch, a number Jack didn't recognize but answered anyway. The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, and vaguely irritated. "Mr. Reynolds, this is Harold Mercer, senior partner at Mercer and Banks Law. I'm calling regarding the property at 1752 Industrial Avenue, known as Reynolds Auto Repair. Our records indicate significant unpermitted structural changes have been made to the premises. Given that this violates the City Code Section 47B, Jack felt his chest tighten. He'd known this was coming, the other shoe dropping. The catch in Eleanor's generosity. Nothing came free, especially not in Riverdale. Mr. Mercer, he interrupted, I think there's been a misunderstanding. All the permits were filed and approved. I have copies right here. That's precisely the issue. Mr. Reynolds, the permits were approved using an expedited process typically reserved for emergency infrastructure repairs. Someone pulled strings, and the City Council wants to know who and why. There will be a hearing next Tuesday at 9 a.m. I suggest you bring legal representation. The line went dead before Jack could respond. He set the phone down slowly, looking around at the pristine shop, the cars waiting for his touch, the stack of business cards left by collectors who'd already scheduled future restorations. All of it threatened now by the very thing he'd worried about from the beginning, Eleanor's world colliding with his, and the fallout that came with it. The City Hall meeting room was packed, rows of folding chairs filled with faces Jack recognized from around town. A few reporters hovering near the back wall. And at the front, a long table where the council members sat with expressions ranging from boredom to thinly veiled hostility. Jack sat alone in the front row, hands clasped between his knees, trying not to fidget. He hadn't called Eleanor pride, maybe, or a deeper instinct that said he needed to handle this himself. Item 7 on today's agenda, announced Councilwoman Peters, a stern woman with steel gray hair and reading glasses perched at the end of her nose. Reynolds Auto Repair, alleged permit violations and unauthorized renovations. Harold Mercer, the lawyer who'd called, approached the podium with a stack of papers. The facts are simple, he began. On Friday, the property was a rundown auto shop with multiple building code violations. By Monday, it had been completely renovated, with permits that were rushed through the system using influence and, frankly, what appears to be corruption. The question is, who's pulling the strings? And what do they want with our town? Jack stood, ready to defend himself, when the council room doors swung open with a dramatic whoosh that made everyone turn. Eleanor Wright walked in, not in jeans this time, but in a tailored navy suit, heels clicking decisively on the tile floor. Behind her trailed a small army of people carrying folders, tablets, and serious expressions. I believe I can address that question, she said, voice calm but carrying to every corner of the room. The person pulling strings, as you so colorfully put it, Mr. Mercer, is me. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Eleanor approached the podium, setting down a slim leather portfolio. My name is Eleanor Wright, CEO of Wright Technologies. And yes, I expedited the permits for Reynolds Classic Auto Restoration, but I did it legally, through the city's own emergency revitalization program, a program that, ironically, Mr. Mercer's firm helped draft 3 years ago to attract businesses to struggling areas of Riverdale. She opened the portfolio and began distributing documents to the council members. You'll find here the complete application, the approval signatures from your own planning department, and a detailed overview of the economic impact this business will have on your community, namely 22 new jobs, a projected annual tax revenue increase of $430,000, and the revitalization of an industrial block that's been declining for a decade. Councilwoman Peters scanned the papers, her expression shifting from skepticism to something closer to reluctant admiration. This all seems to be in order, Miss Wright, but I'm curious why Riverdale? Why this particular shop? Eleanor glanced back at Jack for just a moment, then faced the council again. Because I believe in investing in places and people that matter. Because sometimes the best way to build the future is to preserve what already works. And because Jack Reynolds is the finest automotive restoration expert I've ever met, and he deserves a chance to show the world what he can do without worrying about keeping the lights on. Silence fell across the room. Jack stared at her back, at the straight line of her shoulders, the confidence in her stance. She was fighting for him, not with checkbooks and power plays, but with facts, with vision, with a belief in something he'd built. Well, Councilwoman Peters said finally, shuffling the papers, I think that settles the permit question. She looked at Mercer. Unless you have specific violations to cite, the lawyer hesitated, clearly unprepared for this turn of events. We'll need to review these documents more thoroughly. Of course, Eleanor smiled thinly. Take all the time you need. In the meantime, perhaps we could discuss the Wright Foundation's interest in funding the renovation of Riverdale's community center. I understand it's been in need of repairs for some time. The energy in the room shifted instantly. Council members who had been frowning now leaned forward with interest. Citizens who had come expecting controversy now whispered excitedly among themselves. I think we'd be very interested in hearing about that, Councilwoman Peters said, setting aside the permit paperwork with finality. Very interested indeed. As the conversation turned to community centers and youth programs, Jack caught Eleanor's eye across the room. She gave him the smallest nod, a quiet acknowledgement that said, I'm not walking away. Not this time. I still don't understand why you're doing all this, Jack said later. As they walked slowly through the evening quiet streets of Riverdale, the council meeting had adjourned hours ago, but they'd lingered, talking through details, shaking hands, making plans that somehow became larger with each passing minute. Eleanor glanced at him sideways. You mean, why am I investing in a promising business with excellent growth potential? That's what CEOs do. Jack, that's not what I mean, and you know it. She stopped walking, turning to face him fully. The streetlights cast soft shadows across her face, making her look both vulnerable and determined at once. When I was 8, she said suddenly, my father bought me a bicycle. Beautiful thing, custom built, hand-painted with my name on it. Cost more than most people's cars. Jack waited, sensing there was more to the story. I rode it once, she continued. Fell off, scraped my knee. My father saw me crying and said, Eleanor, right women don't show weakness. Then he took the bike away, said I clearly wasn't ready for such a responsibility. She looked down, scuffing one expensive shoe against the sidewalk. I never got it back. That was my childhood beautiful things given, then taken away the moment I showed I was human. Jack felt something in his chest twist. Eleanor, when I saw you and Lily at the park, she pressed on, you gave her a peanut butter sandwich and let her laugh when it got on her shirt. You didn't take it away when she was messy or imperfect. You just loved her through it. She looked up, meeting his eyes. I want to help build a world where that's possible, where people fix things instead of discarding them, where worth isn't measured by perfection. Jack reached out, hesitating for just a moment before taking her hand. It felt smaller than he expected, softer, despite the strength he knew it held. You don't have to rebuild Riverdale to be part of it, he said gently. You just have to show up. She looked at their joined hands. Then up at the street they stood on the hardware store with its faded awning, the diner with its neon sign, the bookshop where Lily spent her Saturday mornings listening to Storytime. Maybe that's what I'm learning, she said softly. The community center transformation began 2 weeks later, not with a press conference or a ribbon cutting, but with the quiet arrival of contractors, architects, and builders who moved through the old building with respect rather than demolition. The leaking roof was replaced, the ancient heating system upgraded, the basketball court resurfaced, the computer lab, once home to 3 ancient desktops that barely connected to the internet, now housed a row of sleek new machines. The senior center received comfortable new furniture. The children's playground, once a hazard of splintered wood and rusty metal, was rebuilt with careful attention to safety and imagination. No Wright Industries logos appeared. No plaques declaring Eleanor's generosity. Just a simple sign hanging in the front hall. Riverdale Community Center, where neighbors become family. Behind the scenes, Eleanor had established something called the Riverdale Renaissance Fund, a trust managed not by her company, but by a board of local residents. including Mrs. Fain from the grocery store, the high school principal, and Jack himself. The fund would ensure that the community center, the local library, and other vital services would never again fall into disrepair due to budget shortfalls. Word spread. Of course, people noticed, but the absence of fanfare, the lack of corporate branding, spoke volumes. This wasn't about buying goodwill or generating headlines. It was about fixing something broken, simply because it mattered. Dad, look what came in the mail. Lily burst through the garage door, waving an envelope above her head like a victory flag. Jack looked up from the engine of a '57 Thunderbird he'd been painstakingly rebuilding, wiping his hands on a shop rag. What is it, bug? She thrust the envelope into his hands, thick cream paper, addressed to Miss Lily Reynolds, in elegant handwriting he recognized immediately. Can I open it, please? He handed it back, smiling at her excitement. It's your name on it. Lily tore into the envelope with none of the reverence its quality deserved. Pulling out a folded card embossed with a simple leaf design, she read it aloud. Stumbling slightly over the more formal language, Miss Lily Reynolds is cordially invited to a very special picnic at Willow Park this Saturday at 10 a.m. Dress code, whatever makes you happiest. RSVP, not necessary, just bring yourself and your dad. P.S. I'll bring the animal crackers this time. Lily looked up at him, eyes wide. It's from Eleanor, a picnic invitation. Can we go? Please, please, please. Jack felt something loosen in his chest, a knot he hadn't fully acknowledged was there. Tension from weeks of wondering if the silence would return, if the distance would grow again. I think we can manage that, he said, trying to sound casual despite the smile tugging at his lips. Lily whooped, spinning in a circle of pure joy. I'm going to wear my yellow dress and bring my colored pencils and make a new drawing. She dashed off, already planning, already dreaming, already certain that Saturday would come and Eleanor would be there and everything would be exactly as the invitation promised. Jack watched her go, then turned back to the Thunderbird, running his hand along the smooth curve of its fender. In the reflection of its polished surface, he could see his garage transformed now, busy with work he loved, free from the grinding fear of insolvency. Beyond that reflection lay Riverdale itself, still humble, still weathered in places, but strengthening, healing, growing, and soon. The park again, the willow tree, a picnic blanket. 3 people finding their way back to something that had felt right from the start. He picked up his wrench and turned back to the engine, humming softly, for the first time in years. The future didn't feel like something to brace against. It felt like something to move toward. The notification came through on Eleanor's phone during a board meeting, a calendar alert that made her pause mid-sentence as she was explaining quarterly projections to a room full of serious faces and expensive suits. Picnic with Jack and Lily, 10:00 a.m. Saturday. She felt a smile tug at her lips, quickly suppressed it, and continued her presentation. But inside, something light and warm unfurled. The meeting dragged on for another hour. Budget discussions, acquisition proposals, the usual corporate choreography that filled her days. When it finally ended, she lingered in the boardroom after everyone had filed out, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. Somewhere out there, beyond the gleaming skyscrapers and gridlocked streets, was a little park with a willow tree, a mechanic's shop with a new sign, a girl who drew princesses with glitter crowns. Mr. Wright. Her assistant appeared at the door. You have 3 calls waiting, and the Tokyo team needs to speak with you before they leave for the evening. Eleanor turned from the window. Cancel my Saturday appointments. All of them. The assistant blinked. All of them, but the investor brunch. Reschedule, and book me a car for Saturday morning. 9:30, casual dress. I'll be handling a personal matter. Yes, ma'am. The assistant hesitated. And shall I have security arranged for this personal matter? Eleanor thought of the park, of Jack's face when the guards had appeared that first day. She thought of Lily's unguarded laughter, of juice boxes and animal crackers, and sunlight filtering through willow branches. No, she said softly. No security, just the car. The park looked exactly the same and completely different all at once. The grass was still green, the lake still shimmered, the willow tree still swayed in the gentle breeze. But now, nestled beneath its sweeping branches, stood a simple wooden bench with a small brass plaque that hadn't been there before. Jack noticed it first as they approached their spot, Lily skipping ahead with the picnic basket swinging from her arm. He slowed his steps, squinting to read the words etched into the metal. For moments that matter, for picnics and possibilities. No names, no dates, just those simple words and, below them, a tiny engraved image of a crown. Dad, Eleanor's already here, Lily called, waving frantically toward the lake. Jack looked up, and there she was sitting on the grass in jeans and a simple white blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders. No makeup, no pretense. She waved back at Lily, then stood, brushing grass from her pants. As they approached, Jack noticed the familiar red and white checkered blanket already spread out, the wicker basket beside it, the thoughtful absence of security personnel or hovering assistants. I hope you don't mind, Eleanor said as they reached her, a touch of uncertainty in her voice. I wanted to get here early, make sure everything was perfect. It's perfect, Lily declared, dropping to her knees on the blanket. Did you bring the animal crackers like you promised? Eleanor's face relaxed into a genuine smile. 2 bags. And, she reached into the basket. Strawberries. Your dad once mentioned they were important. Jack felt something catch in his throat the memory of that first night, promising Lily a picnic. Her excited voice, just don't forget the strawberries. You remembered that? He asked quietly. Eleanor met his eyes, something vulnerable and honest in her gaze. I remember everything about that day. They sat together on the blanket, Lily between them, chattering happily about school and friends and the drawing she was working on. Jack leaned back on his hands, watching as Eleanor listened to his daughter with genuine interest, asking questions, laughing at her jokes, helping her arrange animal crackers in elaborate patterns before eating them. This time, no one took photos, no one interrupted, no headlines formed in the distance. It was just them, the sun, the willow tree, and a moment carved out of time that belonged only to themselves. I have something for you, Eleanor said eventually. Reaching into her basket, she pulled out a small, flat package wrapped in simple brown paper and tied with twine. A present, Lily gasped, bouncing slightly where she sat. For both of you, Eleanor clarified, handing it to Jack. He took it, feeling its solid weight, raising an eyebrow at Eleanor, who only nodded encouragingly. With careful fingers, he untied the twine and folded back the paper. Inside was a framed photograph, not the blurry, invasive shot that had circled the internet, but something else entirely. It was them, that first day, captured from a distance that somehow felt respectful rather than intrusive. Lily was mid-laugh, Jack was smiling down at her, and Eleanor was looking at them both with an expression so open, so unguarded, it made his chest ache. One of my security team took it, she explained softly. Before all the noise started, I found it on his camera roll when I was trying to track down the leak. She hesitated. It's how I want to remember that day, not the headlines or the chaos that came after. Just this. Jack ran his thumb along the simple frame, feeling the weight of what she was offering, not just a photograph, but a different narrative, a true one. Thank you, he said, and the words felt insufficient for everything swelling in his chest. Lily leaned against his arm, looking at the picture. We look happy, she said simply. We were, Eleanor replied, her eyes meeting Jack's over Lily's head. I'd like to be again. And in that moment, beneath the willow tree with a checkered blanket and animal crackers and a little girl who believed in picnic princesses, Jack felt something slot into place, a gear finding its teeth, an engine finally catching, a broken thing made whole. I think, he said slowly, reaching across the space between them to take Eleanor's hand. That could be arranged. Spring arrived in Riverdale like a gentle awakening daffodils pushing through soil still cool from winter, tree branches heavy with delicate blossoms, and mornings that carried the scent of possibility on the breeze. The town itself seemed to stretch and yawn as residents emerged from the quiet hibernation of colder months, windows thrown open to welcome the shifting season. At Reynolds Classic Auto Restoration, business was thriving in ways Jack had never imagined possible. The once struggling garage now had a wait list months long, with collectors from across the country willing to pay premium rates for his meticulous work. He'd hired 4 local mechanics, including Frank, who'd finally left the tire shop to join him and established an apprenticeship program with the community college. The renovated space hummed with activity from dawn until dusk, filled with the sounds of careful restoration, metal being shaped. Engines revived, history preserved beneath skilled hands. Jack moved through it all with a quiet confidence that felt both familiar and entirely new. Like he'd finally found the perfect gear after years of grinding. But the transformation extended beyond the garage walls. The entire industrial block had begun to change, subtle but undeniable. The abandoned warehouse next door was now being converted into artist studios. The vacant lot across the street had been cleared for a small community garden. Even the coffee shop on the corner had expanded, adding outdoor seating where mechanics and business owners alike gathered in the afternoon sun. None of it happened with fanfare or ribbon cuttings. No press releases announced the Riverdale Renaissance Fund's involvement, but everyone knew the quiet hand guiding these changes belonged to the woman who now regularly appeared at the local diner on Saturday mornings, ordering pancakes with Lily and discussing classic cars with Jack as if she'd always belonged there. "Dad, she's here," Lily called from the living room window, where she'd been stationed for the past 20 minutes, homework abandoned in favor of vigilant watch duty. Jack glanced at his watch and smiled. Exactly on time. As always. He adjusted his collar in the hallway mirror, ran a hand through his hair, and tried to ignore the flutter in his stomach that still hadn't settled. Even after months of this, when he opened the front door, Eleanor stood on the landing with a small bouquet of wildflowers and a canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder. She wore jeans, a simple blue blouse, and flats instead of her usual heels. Her hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and her face held the softness it only showed here. Away from board meetings and press conferences. "Right on schedule," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "You know me." She handed him the flowers with a smile. Chronically punctual, Lily barreled down the hallway, launching herself at Eleanor with the uninhibited joy of an 8-year-old who hadn't yet learned to contain her affection. "Did you bring it? Did you remember?" Eleanor laughed, setting down her tote bag to properly return Lily's hug. "I promised. Didn't I? It's right here." She reached into the bag and pulled out a worn, leather-bound book. "My grandmother's recipe book, as requested for tonight's cooking adventure." Lily clutched the book to her chest like it was made of gold. "Thank you, thank you, thank you. I already got all the ingredients ready, and Dad bought me an apron and everything." "Well then," Eleanor said, straightening up, "I think we're all set for Operation Family Dinner." The word family hung in the air for a moment, unexamined but not unwelcome. Jack caught Eleanor's eye over Lily's head, and something passed between them acknowledgement. Perhaps, of the quiet ways they'd begun to orbit each other, forming something that didn't yet have a name but felt increasingly right. "Let me put these in water," he said, gesturing with the wildflowers, "and then the kitchen is all yours. Ladies." As he filled a mason jar at the sink, he could hear them already: Lily's excited chatter, Eleanor's patient responses, the sound of the recipe book being opened with reverent care. He watched them through the doorway, his daughter and this woman who had somehow, against all odds, become essential to their world. Eleanor caught him looking and raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing at her lips. "You going to help, or just stand there looking handsome?" "Just enjoying the view," he replied, feeling warmth rise to his face at the casual compliment. "Well, get over here." "Reynolds," she said, holding out a wooden spoon like a scepter. "We need a sous chef." And just like that, a Wednesday evening in a modest apartment above a garage became something magical, flower dusting countertops, laughter filling corners that had once held only silence, and three people creating something together that was both simple and profound. Shuri. The office of Mercer and Banks law firm exuded the kind of cold prosperity that seemed designed to intimidate all polished mahogany. Leather-bound books and strategically placed diplomas. Harold Mercer himself matched his surroundings, perfectly silver-haired, sharp-eyed, dressed in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent. "Miss Wright," he said, not rising from behind his imposing desk as Eleanor was shown in. "This is an unexpected pleasure." Eleanor took the seat across from him without waiting for an invitation, setting her briefcase precisely on the floor beside her. "Mr. Mercer, thank you for making time in your schedule. For Eleanor Wright always." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Though I must admit, I'm curious why the CEO of Wright Technologies would request a meeting with a small-town lawyer, especially after our disagreement at the city council meeting." Eleanor held his gaze, neither flinching nor engaging with the thinly veiled hostility. "I'm here about Jack Reynolds." Mercer's expression hardened slightly. Your mechanic friend, the recipient of your rather generous patronage." "Mr. Reynolds is a business associate and a personal friend," she corrected smoothly. "And I've recently learned that your firm holds the mortgage on his late wife's medical bills, a debt that, despite his consistent payments, seems to have an interest rate that ensures he'll never actually clear it." Mercer leaned back in his chair, studying her with new interest. "We merely service the debt. The terms were set by the medical group. Terms that your firm has discretion to modify," Eleanor countered. "Terms that, according to my research, have been modified for other clients in similar situations, just not for Mr. Reynolds. The firm makes case-by-case determinations based on financial viability and—" "Mr. Mercer," Eleanor interrupted gently, opening her briefcase and removing a slim folder. "Let's not waste time with corporate doublespeak. You've been deliberately keeping Jack Reynolds in debt because you disapprove of his connection to me." Mercer's jaw tightened. "That's a serious accusation, Ms. Wright." "It is," she agreed, sliding the folder across his desk. "Which is why I brought evidence." He didn't touch the folder. "What exactly do you want?" "I want to buy the debt, all of it, at fair market value." "The debt isn't for sale." Eleanor smiled thinly. "Everything is for sale, Mr. Mercer. It's just a question of price." She leaned forward slightly. "And whether you'd prefer to negotiate that price with me, or with the State Bar Association after they review the evidence of predatory lending practices and conflict of interest I've outlined in that folder." The silence that stretched between them was taut with unspoken calculations, Mercer weighing his options. Eleanor waiting with the practiced patience of someone who had faced down far more formidable opponents in boardrooms across the world. Finally, Mercer reached for the folder. "I'll need to consult with my partners." "Of course," Eleanor said, standing and smoothing her skirt. "You have until the end of the week. After that, I'll be forced to explore other avenues." She picked up her briefcase. "Oh, and Mr. Mercer, this conversation stays between us. Jack doesn't know I'm here, and I'd prefer to keep it that way." She turned to leave, but Mercer's voice stopped her at the door. "Why do you care so much?" he asked, genuine curiosity breaking through his professional veneer. "You could buy this whole town without denting your fortune. Why focus on one struggling mechanic?" Eleanor paused, considering the question with surprising seriousness. "Because some debts shouldn't exist in the first place," she said finally. "And because sometimes fixing one broken thing properly matters more than trying to fix everything halfway." She left Mercer staring at the folder, the echo of her heels on hardwood fading down the hallway. The picnic bench beneath the willow tree had become their place unofficially, unspoken, but understood. On Sunday afternoons when the weather allowed, they gathered there with the same checkered blanket, the same wicker basket, creating a ritual from what had once been chance today. Jack arrived first, spreading the blanket with practiced ease and setting out the simple feast they'd prepared together that morning: roast chicken sandwiches, fresh strawberries, homemade lemonade in a glass bottle. Lily was at a friend's birthday party, leaving him and Eleanor to a rare afternoon alone. He sat on the edge of the blanket, leaning back against the bench, watching the lake ripple under a gentle breeze. Spring had fully taken hold now, painting Riverdale in vivid greens and bursts of wildflowers. Even the willow seemed more alive, its trailing branches dancing in the wind like it was celebrating something. The sound of footsteps on gravel made him turn. Eleanor approached, carrying a small paper bag and wearing a sundress he hadn't seen before. Yellow. Simple, perfect against her skin. She let her hair down, and the sunlight caught it as she moved, turning it to spun gold. "Sorry I'm late," she said, settling beside him on the blanket. "Board meeting ran long." "On a Sunday," she rolled her eyes. "Welcome to my world. Some of these people don't know weekends exist." She set the paper bag between them. "I brought dessert to make up for it." Jack peeked inside the bag and chuckled. "Animal crackers." "Tradition is tradition," she said with mock seriousness. They ate in companionable silence for a while, watching ducks glide across the lake, enjoying the simple pleasure of food and sunlight in space that belonged just to them. Jack stole glances at her profile, the curve of her jaw, the sweep of her lashes, the way she'd gradually relaxed into these moments over the months they'd known each other. "I got a call yesterday," he said eventually, breaking the quiet. "From Mercer and Banks." Eleanor stiffened almost imperceptibly. "Oh, yeah, strange thing." He took a sip of lemonade. "Apparently, Susan's medical debt has been reassessed. They're closing the account. Debt cleared." He watched her carefully, noting the way she kept her expression neutral despite the sudden stillness in her posture. "That's fortunate," she said. "It is, especially since they couldn't really explain why." He set down his glass. "Just said something about internal policy changes and account reviews." Eleanor reached for a strawberry, examining it with unnecessary focus. "Well, that's good news, then." "Eleanor." She looked up, meeting his eyes, and he saw it there, the knowledge, the careful calculation of how much to reveal. "Did you have something to do with this?" he asked directly. A moment passed between them, waited, honest. Then she sighed softly. "I may have had a conversation with Harold Mercer about my wife's medical bills, about predatory lending practices in general. Your situation may have come up as an example." Jack absorbed this, feeling a complex tangle of emotions: gratitude, discomfort, a faint bristling of pride, and beneath it all, a deeper recognition of what it meant that she would do this for him. "I should be angry," he said finally, "that you went behind my back, that you're still trying to fix things without asking." "Are you?" she asked quietly. He considered the question, really considered it. The debt had been a millstone around his neck for 7 years, a constant, grinding reminder of the worst period of his life, of loss and grief and helplessness. Now it was gone. "No," he admitted, "I'm not angry, but Eleanor." He turned to face her fully. "You can't keep doing this. You can't just wave your financial wand and make problems disappear. That's not how real life works." "And why not?" A flash of frustration crossed her face. "If I have the means to help, why shouldn't I use them? Because some things need to be earned, some struggles need to be faced." He ran a hand through his hair. "And because I need to know you see me as an equal, not a charity case." Her expression softened. "Jack, that's not—" She stopped, choosing her words carefully. "I have never, not for a single moment, seen you as anything less than my equal, in all the ways that matter. You're—" She trailed off, looking away. "I'm what?" he prompted gently. She met his eyes again, vulnerability raw in her gaze. "You're better than me, stronger, more whole. You built a life for Lily out of nothing but love and determination. I built an empire and still felt empty until—" She cut herself off. "Until what?" he asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "Until a peanut butter sandwich in the park." she said softly. Until you. The honesty of it hung between them, too real to dismiss, too profound to simply acknowledge with words. Jack reached for her hand, threading his fingers through hers, feeling the contrast of her smooth skin against his calloused palm. Thank you, he said finally, for the debt, but next time, talk to me first. She squeezed his hand. Deal. They sat like that for a while longer, connected by touch and truth and the unspoken thing growing between them, something that felt increasingly like a future neither had dared to imagine. The Grand Hotel ballroom looked different this time. Same crystal chandeliers, same marble floors, but somehow less intimidating than it had been months ago. Perhaps because, this time, Jack arrived in a suit that actually fit, purchased with his own money from the now profitable garage. Perhaps because Lily walked beside him in a new dress. Confidence in her stride that came from knowing she belonged. Or perhaps because this time, they weren't crashing someone else's world. They were invited guests at a gala they'd helped plan the first annual Riverdale Renaissance Fund benefit. Eleanor met them at the entrance, stunning in a deep green gown that matched her eyes. She knelt to admire Lily's dress first. You look like a princess, bug, before straightening to meet Jack's gaze. And you, she said softly, straightening his tie with familiar ease. Look handsome enough to cause a scandal. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. I think we've had enough scandals for one lifetime. Her smile held promises they were only beginning to explore. The night is young, Reynolds. Inside. The ballroom had been transformed into a celebration of Riverdale itself. Photo displays showcased the community center renovations, the new playground, the expanded library. Local artists had contributed pieces for the silent auction. The catering had been handled by restaurants from town, including Mrs. Fain's nephew's bakery, and the guests that was the most remarkable transformation. Tech industry executives in designer clothes mingled with mechanics in rented tuxedos. City council members chatted with school teachers. Worlds colliding not with friction, but with curiosity, with the genuine interest of people discovering common ground. You did all this, Jack said, watching Eleanor greet guests with the perfect balance of CEO authority and genuine warmth. She shook her head. We did this, all of us. She nodded toward a corner where Councilwoman Peters was deep in conversation with the head of Wright Technology's Innovation Department. That right there, that's what matters. Connections that wouldn't have happened otherwise. As the evening progressed, Jack found himself surprisingly comfortable moving between conversations, shaking hands, explaining the apprenticeship program to potential donors. At one point, he caught sight of Harold Mercer across the room, the lawyer's expression a mixture of surprise and reluctant respect as he watched Jack seamlessly navigate the crowd. When dinner was announced, Jack found himself seated at the head table with Eleanor, Lily, and the board members of the Riverdale Renaissance Fund. Eleanor rose to give a speech, commanding the room with effortless grace. 1 year ago, she began, I reserved a spot in a public park because I wanted to be alone. A soft chuckle rippled through the crowd. Instead, I found myself sharing a picnic blanket with a mechanic and his daughter, eating peanut butter sandwiches and animal crackers. She glanced down at Jack and Lily, her expression softening. What I discovered that day was something I'd been missing in boardrooms and executive suites: authenticity, community, the simple joy of connection without agenda. She gestured to the room at large. The Riverdale Renaissance Fund isn't about charity. It's about investment in people, in places, in possibilities that might otherwise be overlooked. It's about recognizing that sometimes the most valuable things aren't listed on any stock exchange. As applause filled the room, Jack felt Lily's small hand slip into his. Dad, she whispered, is Eleanor going to be part of our family now? The question caught him off guard, not because he hadn't thought about it, but because he hadn't realized how clearly Lily had been watching, observing, understanding what was growing between the adults in her life. Would you want that? He asked carefully. Lily considered this with the serious thoughtfulness of a child who had already navigated more life changes than most. She makes you smile the way you used to in the pictures with Mom, she said finally. And she knows how to fix things. Just different things than you fix. Out of the mouths of babes, Jack thought, feeling a swell of emotion so strong it nearly overwhelmed him. She does, doesn't she? Lily nodded decisively. Plus, she always brings the best animal crackers. Jack laughed, pulling his daughter close against his side. Well, that settles it then. Across the room, Eleanor caught his eye and smiled a private, tender thing meant only for him. And in that moment, Jack knew with absolute certainty that the path forward, whatever twists it might take, would be one they'd walk together. The autumn air carried a crisp edge as Jack climbed the steps to Eleanor's penthouse. A bouquet of wildflowers, the same kind she'd brought to their first cooking night, clutched perhaps too tightly in his hand. The security guard in the lobby had waved him through with familiar recognition, and the elevator had whisked him upward with the same smooth efficiency it always did. But tonight felt different. Tonight, his heart hammered against his ribs with an intensity that reminded him of being 17 again. Nervous and hopeful and terrified all at once. Eleanor opened the door before he could knock, as if she'd been waiting just on the other side. She wore a simple dress, hair down around her shoulders, feet bare against the polished hardwood. The penthouse behind her glowed with warm light, the floor-to-ceiling windows framing a sunset that painted the sky in shades of amber and rose. "Hi," she said, a smile playing at her lips. "Hi," he replied, suddenly feeling every bit the awkward mechanic he'd been the first day they met. "These are for you." He thrust the wildflowers toward her with less grace than he'd intended. Her smile deepened as she took them, fingers brushing his. "They're beautiful. Come in." The penthouse had changed since he'd first seen it months ago, softened somehow. Warmed. Photographs now lined shelves that had once held only design objects. Books lay open on the coffee table. A child's drawing, Lily's unmistakable style, had been framed and hung in a place of honor near the kitchen. "Where's Lily?" Eleanor asked, arranging the flowers in a crystal vase. "Sleep over at Zoe's," Jack replied, watching her move with the easy confidence he'd come to admire. "Mrs. Anderson is dropping them both at school tomorrow." Eleanor set the vase on the dining table, already laid for two with candles and wine glasses. "So we have the evening to ourselves." "We do." She approached him slowly, stopping just close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and warm that he'd come to associate with moments like this, when they found themselves in the quiet spaces between their busy lives. "Jack," she said softly, "you look nervous." He exhaled a laugh. "That obvious. Only to me." She reached up, brushing a lock of hair from his forehead with tender familiarity. "What is it?" He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek for a moment before lowering it between them, their fingers still entwined. "I had this whole speech planned," he said ruefully, "about time and change and how sometimes the most unexpected things turn out to be exactly what you need." Her eyes softened. "That sounds like a lovely speech." It was very eloquent, had metaphors about engines and hearts and everything. And now, he looked at her, really looked, at the woman who had walked into his life by accident and stayed by choice, who had seen him at his most vulnerable and never once made him feel small for it, who had opened her world to him and Lily without trying to change who they were. "Now I just want to ask if you'll marry me," he said simply. Eleanor's breath caught, her eyes widening. For a moment, just a flicker, something like fear crossed her face. Not of him, he knew, but of the magnitude of what he was asking, of the leap they would be taking together. "Jack," she whispered, "are you sure, my life? It's complicated. The press, the company, the expectations. I'm not asking to marry Right Technologies," he interrupted gently. "I'm asking to marry you, Eleanor. The woman who sits on picnic blankets and laughs at my bad jokes and teaches my daughter how to make her grandmother's lasagna." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box, not velvet, but worn leather that had clearly held something precious for a long time. "This was Susan's," he said quietly. "Not her engagement ring that paid for medical bills, but this was her mother's before her." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small, perfect sapphire. Lily helped me choose it. Said it matched your eyes when you laugh. Eleanor looked from the ring to his face, tears gathering in her eyes. Jack, I... Her voice caught. I never thought I'd find this. Someone who sees me. Not the name or the money or the power. Just me. Is that a yes? He asked, hope threading through his voice. She laughed then, a sound of pure joy that seemed to brighten the already golden room. Yes, of course, yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit. As if it had been waiting all along for this moment, Jack felt the last pieces of his world lock into place. Not perfect, not without challenges ahead, but right, completely, undeniably right. Eleanor looked down at the ring on her hand, then back up at him with a smile that held both vulnerability and certainty. I should warn you, she said. I have no idea how to be a normal wife or mother. Jack pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. Good thing we're not looking for normal, he murmured. We're looking for real. And as the sun set over the city, painting the penthouse in shades of gold and promise, they sealed their agreement with a kiss that felt like coming home. The wedding took place where it all began, beneath the willow tree in Willow Park, with the lake shimmering in the background and autumn leaves dancing on the breeze. No press, no fanfare, just 50 chairs arranged in a semicircle and a simple archway woven with wildflowers. Eleanor had insisted on keeping it intimate, just the people who matter, she'd said, and Jack had agreed. Relieved that she understood without him having to explain that some moments were too precious to share with the world. Now he stood beneath the archway, Frank beside him as best man, watching as the small gathering of guests turned in their seats at the first notes of music. The string quartet, Eleanor's one concession to luxury, began playing a gentle melody that seemed to float on the air like the willow branches above them. Lily appeared first, radiant in a yellow dress she'd helped design, carefully scattering flower petals along the grassy aisle. She beamed at Jack as she reached the front, taking her place with a solemn pride that made his heart swell. And then, Eleanor. She walked alone, her choice, a statement about coming to this union as her own person. Her dress was simple ivory silk, falling in clean lines to just above her ankles. No veil, no train, just a crown of small white flowers in her hair and his mother's sapphire ring on her finger. As she moved toward him, face alight with a joy so pure it seemed to radiate from within, Jack felt time slow around them. The guests, the park, even the music faded to background noise against the singular clarity of this moment of Eleanor walking toward him, choosing him, building a future with him that neither could have imagined a year ago. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, feeling the slight tremble in her fingers that matched his own. Up close, he could see the tears shining in her eyes, the smile she couldn't suppress, the love written so clearly across her face that it took his breath away. Hi, she whispered. Just for him. Hi, he whispered back. The efficient councilwoman Peters, who had become a surprising ally and friend through the Renaissance Fund, began the ceremony with words about unexpected beginnings and paths that converge when least expected. But Jack barely heard them, too caught up in the miracle of the woman before him. When the time came for vows, Eleanor spoke first, her voice clear and steady despite the emotions shining in her eyes. Jack, she said, before you, I had everything and nothing at all. Success without joy, achievement without meaning, a life built on expectations instead of dreams. She squeezed his hands. You and Lily showed me what real richness looks like: peanut butter sandwiches on checkered blankets, laughter that doesn't care if it's proper, love that doesn't need to be earned. She glanced at Lily, who watched with wide, delighted eyes. I promise to be present, not perfect, but there, to listen more than I speak, to remember that the most valuable things can't be bought or sold. Her voice softened. And I promise to bring animal crackers to every picnic, for as long as we both shall live. Laughter rippled through the gathering, warm and genuine. Jack felt his own eyes mist as he began his vows. "Eleanor," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "7 years ago, I thought my heart was permanently broken. I learned to function around the empty spaces, to be what Lily needed, to keep moving forward. But I never expected to feel whole again." He reached up, brushing a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You didn't fix me, that's not how love works. But you showed me that broken places can become stronger at the seams, that endings can become beginnings if you're brave enough to turn the page." He smiled at her, putting every ounce of his love into the expression. "I promise to be your equal partner, your safe harbor, and your greatest champion, to face whatever comes good or bad, simple or complicated together, and I promise to never stop making memories worth keeping, for all of us." As they exchanged rings, his a simple band that matched hers, the breeze picked up, sending willow branches swaying and autumn leaves spiraling around them like nature's own celebration. "By the power vested in me," Councilwoman Peters announced, her usual stern demeanor softened by the moment, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," before she could finish with the traditional permission to kiss. Lily darted forward from her spot, wrapping her arms around both their waists in a fierce hug that made the gathering chuckle and applaud. Jack and Eleanor looked down at her, then at each other, and in that moment, a family was truly born not of blood or obligation, but of choice and chance and love that had found its way against all odds. Jack leaned forward, pressing his lips to Eleanor's in a kiss that sealed their promises, their future, their shared journey. And as applause rose around them, mingling with the rustle of leaves and the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore, he knew with bone-deep certainty that this moment, these people, this love was what he'd been fixing things for all along. 5 years later, the bench beneath the willow tree remained weathered now, worn smooth by seasons and visitors, its brass plaque patinated to a gentle gold. But it wasn't empty anymore. Eleanor sat with a small boy of about 4 on her lap, his dark curls and sea-glass eyes marking him unmistakably as their son. Beside her, Jack leaned comfortably against the bench's arm, one hand resting on her shoulder, the other holding a juice box that he occasionally passed to the child. Across the blanket, the same red and white checkered one. Now soft with age and countless washings, 12-year-old Lily lay on her stomach, sketching the lake scene with the focused attention of a budding artist. Her drawing style had evolved beyond stick figures and glitter crowns, but her joy in creating remained unchanged. "And this," Eleanor was saying to the boy, pointing at the brass plaque, "is where Mommy and Daddy met. Right here, under this tree, and with animal crackers," the child added solemnly, clearly having heard the story many times before. Jack laughed. "That's right, James, the very important animal crackers. And I was here too," Lily chimed in, not looking up from her drawing. "I'm the one who offered her the sandwich. The most important sandwich in history," Eleanor agreed, dropping a kiss on James's head before looking up at Jack with eyes full of memories and contentment. The park had changed around them, improved, expanded, cared for by a community that had found new pride in itself. Riverdale, too, had transformed, growing not into a gentrified shadow of its former self, but into a vibrant town that honored its roots while embracing new possibilities. Reynolds Classic Auto Restoration now occupied an entire block. With a training center for young mechanics and a small museum of automotive history, the Wright Reynolds Foundation, they'd merged their separate initiatives after the wedding-supported community development across the region, and their home, a thoughtfully renovated Victorian on the edge of town, stood as a perfect blend of their worlds, elegant but comfortable, historic but functional. But through all the changes, all the growth, they returned here to the willow tree, to the checkered blanket, to the place where an accident of timing and space had changed everything. 5 more minutes, Jack called as James wriggled off Eleanor's lap to chase a butterfly fluttering near the lake's edge. "Then we need to pack up for dinner at Grandma Fane's." Mrs. Fane, who had eventually come around to Eleanor after seeing her genuine commitment to Riverdale, had adopted them all as family, hosting Sunday dinners that had become a cherished ritual. As they watched their son explore the world with the fearless curiosity of childhood, Eleanor leaned into Jack's side, fitting perfectly against him as she always had. "Happy?" he asked softly, though he knew the answer. She looked up at him, at the laugh lines around his eyes, the touch of gray at his temples, the face that had become her home. "Beyond measure," she replied, and as the afternoon light filtered through willow branches, painting them all in dappled gold, the bench beneath the tree stood witness to what it had helped create, a family built not from obligation or expectation, but from peanut butter sandwiches and animal crackers, and the courage to sit down beside a stranger on a checkered blanket and see where the moment might lead. The spot had been reserved once, not for them but for solitude. Fate, it seemed, had other plans.